Now, switching gears, we're going to be moving into our next keynote session, ensuring diversity, equity, and inclusion in a remote workplace. I am honored to be welcoming our moderator for today's panel, the Associate Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion from Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley, Marco Lindsey. So now I will turn it over to you to introduce the rest of our incredible panelists and get started with today's conversation. Over to you, Marco.
Thank you, Marissa. I want to welcome you all to our panel discussion on ensuring diversity, equity, and inclusion in a remote workspace. As noted, my name is Marco Lindsey. I'm the Associate Director of DEI at the Haas School of Business, and I'll be moderating this discussion. One of the things that most organizations and their teams are having the most anxiety about is what the new workspace will look like. With organizations being primarily split into 3 different categories, either fully in person, fully remote, or a hybrid model that combines them both. Today, I'm joined by 3 industry experts they're a treat, and we will dive into this topic and get their perspectives on how things are going, how things should go, and what their respective organizations are doing now and in the future. We have a lot of ground to cover, so I want to begin by welcoming our honored guests, and I'll start by welcoming Dr. C. Morris of Peloton. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Wonderful to have you. Next up, we have our next panelist, Ragini Holloway of Affirm. Welcome, Ragini.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Last but certainly not least, we have Jason Medley of Codility. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks, Marco. Excited to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, panelists, please tell us quickly a little bit about the current status of your organization's remote work policies. Ragini, if you could tell us about Affirm.
Sure thing. Yep. So we are fully remote first for just over about a year and a half now. To paint the picture a little bit more, we're a public company. We're scaling at rapid speed. So in that last year, we've already doubled our headcount, and we're expected to double again. We're also public and global. Our remote first approach, what that means, because it means something different to every company out there, and it's become a little bit of a buzzword as well. So I want to define what that means for Affirm. It means that the majority of our Affirmers have the option to decide whether or not they wish to work at home or come into the office. So we do still have our major hubs. We have 5 major US hubs. And they're still there if people wanted to go into the office, but actually most opt to be 100% remote. And so what that looks like essentially is, we were, before we became the remote first, in 5 US cities. This is before we became global. During that time now we've become global, and within the United States specifically, we're in like 45 states. And it gives the opportunity for folks to really kind of be flexible in where they need to be. Someone like me during this time, I've been in San Francisco for the past decade, and I was able to move back to the Philadelphia area and be closer to family and friends, and it has significantly improved my engagement and work-life balance and those for our Affirmers. So we'll get into it a little bit more, but that's just kind of a brief introduction into what Affirm is doing.
Thank you, very helpful. Jason?
Yeah, so Codility, we're actually a remote first organization as well. And what that means for us is in how we operate, how we communicate, how we run meetings, all of that. It's set up in a way so that if you are working remote, you're fully able to thrive. I would say about 90% of our employees are fully remote, but we actually believe that people should be allowed to work the way that works best for them. So for most people, this is 100% remote, but in the spirit of being inclusive, we very much, like what Ragini just mentioned, we have hubs in 4 cities across the world. So 1 in the US, 3 in Europe. If you're in one of our hub cities, you can pop into one of those offices. Or we've also given everyone who would like it global WeWork access. So if they need to pop into any local WeWork, or if they're traveling and they're working while they're traveling, they're able to do that quite freely. So we've in parallel to that, we've also adjusted our compensation model, and we've allowed people to sort of move within their countries without reducing their pay. And we'll get into that a little bit more later. But the idea is that we're trying to be as flexible as possible.
Thank you, Jason. Dr. Morris, tell us about Peloton.
Sure, and thank you so much for having us. We're public, global, geographically dispersed, and of course, multifaceted. So not only do we have retail, field operations, supply chain, corporate, tech, our instructors who work with our members. So we're required, of course, to be in our stores, to deliver our hardware, to be accessible to our members. So for those folks that are customer facing, of course, they do need to be prominent in the workplace and in their in the positions that they hold. But our corporate folks have primarily during the pandemic been remote. We are also in a hub situation where we have some major hubs in a few cities. And for those that are aligned in those hub offices, we just opened our New York office for some folks to kind of go back and be inside. But we've been very intentional about ensuring that people that can be remote, that we have been able to afford them to do so. But we've been really intentional about setting clear standards around calendar management and communication and meetings, taking intentional time off. So we're pushing pace and setting time for recovery. And then also ensuring that people are positioned to have time off and have the work-life norms that they need when they need them.
Thank you, Dr. Morris. Thank all three of you for sharing what your organizations are doing. Very helpful. I want to drill down a bit about Affirm. And Ragini, maybe you can tell us, Affirm has been a remote-first organization for some time. Do you have some examples of how this is added to Affirm's diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging initiatives?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So by being a remote first organization, we're not requiring employees to actually come into the office. So the first thing I want to kind of focus in on is how that impacts commute, right? So it allows for more flexibility. And what that means is that it really helps parents and caregivers, really everyone in general, that they can work whenever they want, where they want, et cetera. So that's huge for us. And then, we also believe that the approach, and we've seen this, it supports employees' mental wellness. So depending on where we were with COVID-19 and where we still continue to be, if employees needed to get away from whatever was happening at home and go into one of our hubs, they were able to do that, or actually rent off office space, we were able to provide some sort of a stipend for that as well. So we gave that kind of flexibility so that there was never kind of this perception around like, whether I choose to be at home or in the office or wherever I choose to work and do my best work, that it's no hindrance to any career opportunities or growth or my development at Affirm. So that was huge. We also took a look at our benefits and our perks and how to make them more inclusive. With our growing diverse workforce, which I'll get to about how it impacted recruiting in a second, but we thought about, on-demand virtual access to healthcare, virtual care to support parents, or when it comes to maternity or surrogacy and fertility options and so forth. So we really kind of expanded how we thought about that for folks. And then even down to like how you think about learning. So it's no longer just supporting maybe the employee in the office, but you are now supporting in many cases families at home. And so how do you think about, providing virtual learning experiences with remote certified educators? So we started to provide that as well. What we had going for us was that we already early in the fabric of Affirm's DNA. I've been with the company for a long time. I actually was their first head of DEI. So we had a strong ERG framework already in place going into this. So that really did help us, that we already had communities built and that they were already there to support one another with the company support as well through the transition to remote first. I will say though, that when we did our engagement survey, I was joking, but not really joking, saying like remote first really looks good on Affirm because our engagement scores went through the roof. People really enjoyed having that space, and our inclusion and belonging scores were very high. And so we're continuing to dig in further as to what is it that we're doing well, because there's obviously some nuggets there. The greatest thing about remote first for us has been that it's not just that you can work anywhere, which I just kind of gave you some examples, but you can essentially recruit anywhere. And while we had been really focused on hiring from specifically for more diversity within our underrepresented groups, same within tech, women, Black, Latinx, we actually, when you start to have access, you realize you might have some blind spots to certain geos, you take them down, you actually really tap into it's gold. We've been able to increase diversity in meaningful ways, and especially in our people management group. And if you think about it, I was just saying we doubled our workforce and we're continuing to do that. That helps a lot. And so we've seen significant increase there. And the one stat that I can specifically call out is, we've hired 13 VP and above, vice president and above positions, all the way up to the C level. And 6 out of the 13 have come specifically from our underrepresented groups while we've been remote first, which is huge. We weren't able to successfully move the needle like that prior. So that is just, I'll leave that stat to sit with you. And, and I always like to tie it personally, kind of what my experience has been. I've been with the company for 5 years. I've obviously been supportive. I've been with the company for 5 years. However, as a leader and as a woman of color, having now that network at that VP plus level, I feel even more supported and renewed. And I personally, from my own employee experience, I attribute a lot of that to being in a remote first model.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. I think you put some things out there to make remote first look very good. I'd like to pivot a bit and go to Jason. Jason, in past conversations, we've talked about the idea of Humanfirst initiative. Would you mind elaborating on this and telling us how Codility embraces it?
Yeah, so I think personally, the way that I've thought about this, and I'm lucky enough to work for an organization that thinks about this the same way, is that I think for so long, humans, all of us, we've had to be forced to adjust the way we live, the way that we work to the best of our abilities for our employer, for the workplace, versus the workplace stepping back and going, how can we sort of adjust for humans? How can we adjust so that humans do their best work possible, and not even just their best work possible, but how can we help them thrive as individuals so they can show up and be their best while they're at work? And this is something I'm extremely passionate about. I think a lot about how for so long we've had to think about how to fit life into work versus how do we fit work into life, right? And so we stepped back and when I joined Codility, and we really looked at everything across the board, from our benefits to our compensation to our remote work strategy, and how could we be more human first and human led. And so that's sort of come through in several different ways. So one, of course, what we were speaking to earlier is our remote policy. And really, that's what we really say is we want you to work the way that works best for you. And it's not and what we've also realized is it's not you just take one survey and you're locked into that forever. People have different seasonalities of life. Problems come and go, children come and go. We have different seasons. And so we wanted to make sure that we can meet people right where they're at and help them be really successful. And so that's one of the reasons why we say, you know what, if you need global WeWork access, if you need a hub, if you need to be 100% remote, and even if that changes, we're going to support you in that. The other thing that we did was we really looked at our compensation strategy. So I recognize that not every organization is in a position to do this based on scale or industry. But one of the things that we looked at was that, particularly within a pandemic, but then even outside of a pandemic, again, we thought about humans when they have to leave and go take care of maybe sick relatives, or they need to move their kids to a better school district across the other side of the country. We thought about, okay, how can we attract and retain our best talent? And what we decided was we actually stopped looking at the localized benchmarks, meaning the individual cities, and we stepped back and we looked at them in terms of country benchmarks. And now we have country benchmarks, and we say, okay, here is your salary. It's a competitive, it's a very competitive country specific benchmark, but you can live anywhere within that country that you want to, and that sort of serves your purchase. So if you want to take that salary and you want to live in a city like San Francisco, you'll be able to thrive. You'll be able to do really well. You can take that same salary. You'll probably live a lot better in the countryside of Mississippi, if that's where you choose to be. But we wanted to make sure that we were really meeting people where they were at in that. The other thing that the pandemic, one of the silver linings, I think, in the pandemic that's really sort of helped us is the emphasis on mental health. So this is something that Codility really pays attention to. So we constantly use the hashtag break the stigma. If you dropped into almost any Slack channel within our organization, it would not be surprised to actually see that hashtag. But weekly, we actually have people sharing their own mental health journey stories publicly within our Slack channel. And we're starting to break the stigma of that. We also rolled out mental health days. So these are days where they do not have to be pre-approved. It's a moment where you wake up and you know what, I can't do today. I need a break. I'm not going to pretend like I'm going to the dentist. I need a mental health break. Or it's in the middle of the day. You need to push that red button and go, I've got to take a breath. I need a break. And we give everyone a certain amount of mental health days per year that they can use at any time that they want. We've also, Codility, for those of you who aren't familiar with us, so we are technical assessment platforms for teams to test the coding skills of developers. And we work with many large-scale organizations globally to some of the fastest growing startups. And we look at this within our products too. So how can we make testing for coding skills more accessible with people with different diversity, with people with different disabilities or neurodiversities? And we've really thought about that and implemented into our product as well. Then another big thing that it's been really important to me this past year is really bringing the conversations out of ERGs. So what we find is that ERGs, and rightly so, are a very safe space and a space haven. But if all of the conversation stays within those ERGs and it never comes out and they're never sort of exposed, then I don't know how much better we're sort of doing and if we're achieving our goals. And so one of the things that we've done is we've started having conversations outside in sort of a global discussion within our organization. So we did this with an LGBTQ panel within our organization where people really shared what it was like growing up being gay, coming out, what it's like interviewing and not feeling like you can openly talk about being gay. We're getting ready to do this with women, particularly with women of color. What is it like to be a woman of color in an organization? And when you want to express a need or you have a challenge, what does that feel like? And so the idea is that we're all humans. We all have anxieties, we have fears, we have needs, we have seasonalities in lives, and we're really trying to create a culture stacked with strong benefits that support people through those different stages of life.
I love it. Human first. I love it. Dr. Morris, Peloton has seen exponential growth. Your office is not even open yet, but you're looking at a hybrid approach. And when you do open, what are the DEI implications to this approach?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's interesting because there's so much research that talks about remote working, and I'm listening to my colleagues talk about being remote first. And we are somewhat on the other side of the spectrum here, and there's no wrong or right. You have to make it work for you. But I was recently reading a SHRM report that said that 67% of supervisors consider remote workers more replaceable than on-site counterparts. I thought that was really interesting. We're deeply committed to a workplace experience that is enjoyable and equitable and collaborative and service to our business and our culture. So we're currently investing in both hybrid, flexible, or remote. And we took a very engaging approach by investing in a hybrid tool to help our leaders understand how to lead remote teams, achieving wide inclusion, adaptivity, resilience, and collaboration resilience skills. And it was great. It was very well received. We held focus groups and to understand needs. We took a look at our engagement survey results, as someone else mentioned, and ensured that we were really positioned to offer as many options as we could to all people. So we have a very large number of hourly team members. We decided we needed to offer a civic time off policy to enhance the rest of our policies, to assist with voting and participating in civic activities. Because if you think about remote working, hybrid working, and just having those work-life harmony options, our hourly workforce, they don't have those options. They're not afforded the privilege of being in a corporate environment where we can work from home or work remotely in this time right now. So that policy is separate from volunteer, sick, and PTO. And that's probably one of the biggest groups that we need to pay more attention to from a disparity standpoint, in the sense of who gets the opportunities to exercise flexibility in remote working versus who doesn't. It's already been mentioned, but we have hundreds of Slack channels to help build community, ensuring that our ERGs and different folks who join our organization have the opportunity to build community. One of the things that we've learned, with our average age being around 32, we have hired more people since March of 2020 than existed in the organization prior to. For a while, we were at hyper growth, hiring about 400 people per month. And what that means is we don't have the time, we weren't taking the time to ensure that we were meeting the needs of every single individual, because hybrid working, flexibility, and the needs of our workers is a very individual thing, as already alluded to. So we did take a look at our ERGs, our mental health benefits, our pay, and making sure that that was equitable. And we did make some pay adjustments. Inclusion is really built into the fabric of Peloton's values. And so our work-life norms now include operating at about 80% to save space for deep thinking. But we did make sure we had to pay attention to all the different things that were happening: AAPI, Stop Asian Hate, everything that was going on around anti-Semitism. We have a large London office, so our UK Black employees told us that when everything was happening around UK football and the race relations, we paused and had listening sessions to make sure that people were feeling heard and seen and valued. So there's so much that goes into how we show up for our both our members, our paid members for our hardware and our digital application, but also for our internal teammates, and ensuring that they're seeing they're feeling heard and valued, and that they have the opportunities to have access and exposure to leadership, and that they're being seen and heard in the meetings that they participate in. So it's been really interesting to bring people together during such a tumultuous time when you're in hyper growth, but wanting to make sure you're being really intentional about the time.
Thank you. Thank you all. To the attendees, I really hope you all are taking notes. I'm taking notes. I mean, there's some nuggets in here. You know, with the remote first option, I love the, virtual access to healthcare. That's something new and a bit dynamic, and the break the stigma, the mental health days. I think that's extremely important because, there is a lot of stigma associated with people going through mental health issues, and they've been afraid to say so at work because of, potential retribution or being judged. And then, the civility in days, that's brand new. I've seen, individual supervisors say, hey, you can take, but for the organization to do that, I think that's pretty phenomenal. So take notes and take a lot of this stuff back to your respective organizations. Next question, and this will be for everyone, and I'd like Dr. Morris to respond first for Peloton. When it comes to remote work, there's no one size fit all solution. So how do you think organizations can adapt to different markets and especially different socioeconomic situations?
Yeah, that's huge. Know your audience, know your landscape. I love what Jason said about human first and human led. So I'll bring this to kind of how Peloton operates. Create before and after moments. So when hosting hybrid events and meetings, it's important to engage folks before and after meetings so they feel connected and part of the experience. For example, before a Peloton class goes live, the instructor engages with the audience in person and talks to the camera as people log in by addressing the in-person and remote audience simultaneously. Users in both settings are invited to participate in a shared experience. Begin your meeting planning by considering how people will enter. Be mindful to acknowledge people in the room and those who are calling in, signaling that both groups are present and shared in that experience. Also notice and acknowledge people. So I love this. Peloton instructors not only acknowledge users, but they also know them, right? So shout outs, they celebrate users by name when they can see birthdays, names, locations, milestones, and then users report feeling motivated by these acknowledgments. So when people feel that they're valued and that they add value, it makes people more likely to develop a sense of belonging and experience increased well-being. So let your people know you see them. This may include giving feedback on a project, sharing praise, or simply narrating their attendance and location in a meeting. There's nothing worse, and I've experienced this before in my past life, there's nothing worse than joining a meeting and not being acknowledged, particularly given how busy we all are and that we're all juggling multiple priorities. From a socioeconomic standpoint, there's so much about camera on, camera off. I know when I first joined Peloton, we're a fairly meeting-centric, meeting-heavy organization, and camera being on all the time, there's a lot of research that talks about how exhausting it can be. So give people some grace and space to have that camera off without having to say why it's off, right? Be okay with folks muting their backgrounds or just turning their cameras off. It can be exhausting to have to worry about the baby, the child, the pet, the aging parent in the background. Or sometimes you just need to listen. When you listen more intently, you actually are even able to participate better than being distracted by things that are moving in the background in the squares when you're online. Noticing where there's an advantage or a disadvantage is also crucial with making reasonable adjustments to ensure the access to power, influence, technology, and connection is fairly distributed. And then the last thing I'll say is deciding who should speak first. So we tend to forget about those not present in the room. Next time when addressing your team members, turn to your online colleagues, turn to your offline colleagues first. So if you're in a hybrid model and there's folks in a room, in a conference room, maybe everyone was able to make it into a particular office except for 2 people on the team, get to those folks that are called dialing in versus paying attention to only what's in front of you. Great question.
Thank you. Ragini, tell us about Affirm.
Yeah, I loved how Christal, how you honed in on recognition and giving that space and how to show up and connect. I also loved how you started off by saying knowing your audience. I want to hone in a little bit about surveying folks, because if there's anything, if you're trying to figure out just like what is the right approach for you, or if you've just decided that you are going to be remote first and you're like, okay, and this is where Affirm was. We're remote first. We have no idea what that means, right? We actually did that, right? We just knew we were going to do it, right? We're just done the whole about it. And they're like, okay, now what? And we've been figuring it out. So when we first surveyed, we learned that we did not set folks up properly for what it means to be remote, whether it was just as simple as their home office setup. We didn't get it right. And so I'm grateful that we surveyed right in the beginning. And we surveyed around, and I think there was a question around this in the chat as well, around productivity and autonomy and connection. We surveyed all of this right when we started, and then we recently surveyed again, and we've seen significant increases. And it's been great information. So what I'll say to everyone is just, make sure that you survey folks and that the leadership team gets to hear from everyone through that survey and understands the factors, and especially how that impacts folks as you're continuing to build a diverse workforce. Hopefully that is a priority for you. And that how does that impact? Because again, for us, when we doubled the workforce, and I shared a little bit of how that impacted us in hiring more for our URGs, we started to tap into a whole area that we were unfamiliar with of how do we support this workforce now? And why not just ask employees and learn from them a little bit and then action on that and show how we're actioning on that? And so we redefined how we thought about our compensation and how that impacts in different markets, and how do we keep pay equity intact. We thought about, all right, we're not in like a really nice upscale San Francisco office with an amazing view and dinners and lunches, but we are going to make sure everybody is and their families have grocery stipends and learning stipends and paying for health benefits and lifestyle benefits, so people can actually take care of their health no matter what their socioeconomic situation is, right? Like leveling the playing field for everyone and supporting people so they can thrive in the environment. So we saw significant increase in our survey data, upwards to like 17 to 20% increase on, more autonomy, feeling productive at work, at home versus the office. So that is one very simple but highly impactful thing that you can do, is just start by asking your own people.
Thank you, Ragini. Jason, we'll go to you, and then I'll pull some questions from the audience as we begin to close out.
Yeah, I'll go really quick. I love all of these. Christal loved the engage before and after piece. I think that's so critical. So thanks for sharing that. I've definitely jotted that down. I think for us, one is Like Ragini, I love surveys. I think they're extremely important. I think if you've only done one survey throughout this entire pandemic, you're already behind. That first survey, people didn't even know, right? Like so much has changed. And I will say this, survey is one approach to a multifaceted approach, I think, right? So, or it's one aspect of a multi-faceted approach. So I think that within surveys, we also have to recognize that not everyone fills them out. Some people are scared of them. Culturally, in different cultures globally, the way that they engage with surveys are different as well. And so I say all that because please do not shy away from surveys. Huge believer, and we should actively be doing them, but also training our managers to be listening and asking the right questions, and then also creating the culture within your core management groups where that information gets funneled up to decision makers. So many times I see information staying on the ground level and it's not getting to the right people until it's too late. So surveys are one mechanism for that, but training our managers to ask the right questions and bubble things up in a safe way is really, really crucial as well. The other thing I'll call out, one of the things that we noticed this past year, and I'd spoken about it with this group before, but and I think is really interesting is particularly now that we're within global warming. So air conditioning became a thing this past year. So for some of our folks on the West Coast, for some of our folks in some of our European cities, I would hop into meetings and some of them were just sweating, we're burning up, right? And you know that affects productivity. You know that affects mood. You know that affects relationships, energy. And so thinking through, okay, how do we meet people in these ever-growing pandemics that we're finding ourselves in, be it health-related, be it global warming? Like, how do we meet people where they're at? How do we give them access to air conditioning so that they have an equal chance of performing well, learning and gaining new skills, and being promoted, right? And so being aware, making sure you're stepping back and you're watching what's going on, that you're training your managers to ask the right questions. And then I think the last thing that I would hear that I would actually say here is just continuing to make sure that there is pressure on your leadership team to engage with your people as well, right? So again, especially in large organizations, your leadership team can't meet with everyone, but a big part of their function should be speaking on the ground level, learning from different people within different groups. I think it's critical.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you all for these insights. It's been very helpful. I'm seeing a lot of back and forth in the chat, a lot of fingers being snapped, a lot of hands being clapped. So I want to pull a question from the audience, and actually it came up twice. It's about measuring belonging. And Ragini, I'll ask you to lead because you mentioned measuring and belonging, how to improve remote first. And what are your organizations doing to measure belonging? How do you measure?
Yeah, so we, going into being remote first, we had already started surveying and having a dedicated DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging survey, going out to our team at a small size, right? So we were small when we first did it. We were, I would say we didn't start small enough, but still, compared to other companies, it was roughly about 150 employees when we started to survey. And so we've been able to see over time how we've improved our belonging stats in testing the same statements, right, and how that changes over time. In remote first, once we went in that direction, we continued. So I did say a little bit about making sure you survey the people, but then you also on the back end should be breaking it up by demographic, tenure, age, all different things, so you can actually really understand by specific communities how to pay a little bit more attention within those communities, that you can talk to your ERGs as well to understand how you can drive impact there. So we've been doing a lot of specific work, not just across the companies, but specifically within communities to drive those belonging scores up and more engagement and connection for the community. So what I'll say is, like, there's two sides of the survey. It's not just asking the questions, but then how do you break up that data as well? But back to what in some communities by 10 points, in other ones we have some work to do, but we didn't actually go down in any of our communities once we became remote first on the belonging score.
Something I'll just add really quick, I think is really critically important is first to define what belonging means in an organization. I think it's one of those buzzwords that a lot of people think they know, or maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but first just what does belonging mean to us? What does that mean, right? It means that people can show up and people have an equal chance to learn, to grow, to advance, and they feel like that within a safe environment, they can speak up. And that they can thrive. And so making sure that your managers understand that you're not under training your managers on what it means to be belonging. So at Codility, yes, we measure this. We measure this. We partner with Culture Amp through a series of surveys that we do. We also look at our exit interview information. We don't have tons of turnover, but it is something that we look at to make sure, hey, we ask questions around belonging, specifically that bubble up to belonging, to make sure that we can pinpoint there. We're also doing active ongoing training. And then we're also learning from our managers. What are you hearing around this? Giving them ideas in their one-on-one, questions to ask around this, making sure that they know how to sort of include people and bring those topics up as well.
Thank you. For the next question, I'll pull from the chat. And since we're talking about belonging, let's talk about the ERGs you all may have. What groups have representation at your respective organizations? I'll start with you, Dr. Moore.
Sure. We have 8. 3 are ethnicity-based, Latino Americans, and it's Heritage Month this month, so we just kicked off our 10 celebrations for this month. Also Black at Peloton, and ACE, which is Asian American Pacific Islander. We also have parents, veterans, one for kind of mental wellness disability, which is called Thrive, and our LGBT Pride. So we have 8, very active, and they've been around for 2 years.
Thank you. Ragini or Jason?
Yeah, so we actually have 5. So we have people of color, LGBTQ+, neurodiversity, which is our newest one, which we're very excited about. We're actually doing a series of internal podcasts, actually, and we're highlighting and we're speaking to this because it's a fairly new topic. Really super excited about it. Of course, women at Codility, and then parents as well, which has been extremely useful throughout the pandemic.
I love that you have neurodiversity. Woo! Amazing. I will be connecting with you offline on that. That's amazing, Jason. We have employee resource groups, and then we have community groups. And we have a distinction there within Affirm. And so our employee resource groups, let me pull up this list. We have the Asian Heritage Alliance, LGBTQ+, Black at, Amigis, which is our Latinx community, Women at and Veterans at. And then our community groups, we have Chinese language and culture, mental wellness, women, so that's our women engineers, South Asians, immigrants, Jewish community, and parents.
Now tell me, how do you define or differentiate between an ERG and a community group?
So it's based on representation, and where we really want to focus in more from a company perspective, increasing the representation there and the support for those communities to be able to thrive. And so that would fall under our employee resource groups versus our community groups, where people can still drive community and where there's some sort of commonality, whether like it's the Jewish community or Chinese language and culture or parents, but still giving those groups the ability to have community and resources as well. So the budget looks a little bit different, obviously, as well as what we would give to employee resource groups versus community groups. But when we first started, we learned the lesson that we said employee resource groups, and boy, we had like 20. I was like, okay, we don't need 20 employee resources. Let's really define what that looks like. But people obviously really need community. And so being able to provide that distinction has helped us. And now being in remote first really set us up for a lot of success, because we had
I think Ragini's frozen. We'll come back to that. I'll pull another question from the audience while that's working itself out. What advice can you give to improve the software side of communication in a fully remote workspace? Sometimes things land differently over Slack, or many times things land differently over Slack or email. And so do you all have any ideas or suggestions on how to improve in those areas?
We love using our all hands approach. So when we bring all of our team members together for an all hands, it's live streaming. And so they are able to get to see someone's face and hear the articulation and the softness and the intentionality. We also use leadership videos, which we love. So if we're launching a really important critical message around hybrid working or return to work, we love using videos or our head of people to talk about the intentionality and what we're trying to communicate there. So you're right, emails and Slack aren't always the best way, but we love using live stream or videos from our leaders and or holding listening sessions or focus groups for follow-up on things like that. We also encourage our leaders to add some of these important elements on their agendas. So then we're having their stand-up meetings or smaller team meetings that they can cascade this message, particularly to our hourly workforce who may not have the accessibility to our broader, larger streamed meetings. But there's always a nice element to adding a softer approach. So that's really a great question.
Yeah, and I love the mix of mediums is always great. Again, speaking to people who learn and listen and consume information differently. Also, one of the things I do a lot just in, as a manager myself in coaching sessions is assume good intent. And when in doubt, ask questions respectfully, right? I think a lot of times if we just start there, we're really good in terms of when miscommunication comes across. The only other thing I'd add to that too is we've been doing some work with Life Labs Learning around this. I don't know if any of you out there work closely with them, but they do some phenomenal training and they're doing really great work with remote training as well. If you haven't looked at them, check them out. They're absolutely fantastic.
We actually leverage them as well for our kind of hybrid remote decisions, and they're the group that helped to lead our focus groups on that topic. So that's great.
It's great.
Thank you. Here's another question. Do you, for remote, hybrid, in person, do you have the same productivity results as compared from working within the office? I think that's a big question that a lot of managers face.
I happen to write a 120-page doctoral dissertation on that question, so I'll take a stab at answering it.
Yes,
I did. I ran a phenomenological study on 10 women who were working from home and 10 women remotely permanently, and 10 women who were working in the office, and looking at motivations, productivity measures. And it was found that those who were working remotely were just as, if not more, productive than those who worked from the office, particularly because lack of disruptions, starting earlier, ending later. So getting a lot more done. But then there were the other elements and dynamics around exposure, access. Do you feel like not being seen means that there's maybe some impact to your career trajectory or to promotions, right? So it could be very productive, but hey, I'm not taking you to lunch. I'm not there for happy hour. So I might be missing out on those informal conversations that help to solidify relationships and make those deeper connections. So that was from my doctoral study, which was just about 5 or 6 years ago.
I'm not even going to try to compete with that. You literally wrote a dissertation on it.
Wow. We couldn't have guessed that. Welcome back, my friend. I'm not sure if you heard the question.
I did not. Remote at its finest. I'm very sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
I mean, this is exactly what we're talking about.
It's very on brand. I planned that.
Exactly.
Don't you know?
Thank you. Very, very sharp. Very sharp. I love it. I guess the question was, and feel free to not answer it because Dr. Morris literally wrote the book on the answer. And so, but do you have the same productivity results as compared from working with home as you did as in person in the office?
Oh, I answered this earlier, actually. We went up 17 points when we went remote first. So we saw a dramatic increase. And those results are just as of 3 weeks ago, actually. So huge increase for sure.
Hot off the press results. We're coming at time, and so what I'd like to do is just make sure that we close out. I want to thank you all. Thank the three of you, Ragini Holloway of Affirm, Dr. Morris of Peloton, Jason Medley, Codility. Thank you to Jim for hosting this informative and very helpful and timely discussion. We realize that a lot of our organizations are going to be dealing with these questions. We're going to be hoping to have some good answers, and we realize there's no one right answer. There's no one size fit all. And so hopefully you glean something from this conversation that you can take back to your respective organizations.